The city of London sparkled under the glow of streetlights and a clear night sky. From the lavish penthouse atop Harrington Tower, Sebastian Harrington stood motionless by the floor-to-ceiling window. His piercing green eyes gazed down at the bustling streets below, though his thoughts lingered in the shadows of his past. Sebastian was a celebrated businessman, a man who had built his empire through sheer determination and calculated precision. But beneath his unshakable exterior lay a heart marked by betrayal. Years ago, he had believed in love, only to have Isabella Munro shatter that belief in the cruelest way, leaving scars he couldn't erase. The woman he thought he would spend his life with had betrayed him, leaving behind a void he had never managed to fill. At a recent grand gala, as music echoed under the glittering chandeliers, an unexpected turning point unfolded. Sebastian faced a challenge from Lucas Everett, his longtime friend from university. The dangerous wager that followed led him straight to Lila Kensington, a rebellious socialite notorious for her headline-grabbing scandals. What began as a calculated game would soon evolve into a story neither Sebastian nor Lila could have anticipated. A story that would change both of their lives forever. The glittering chandeliers of the Imperial Hotel cast their radiant glow over the Grand Hall, where London's elite had gathered. The air buzzed with laughter and the clinking of champagne glasses, but Sebastian Harrington remained aloof. He leaned against the bar, a glass of whiskey in hand, observing the crowd with his usual detached demeanor. Lucas Everett, his university friend and confidant, approached with a mischievous grin. "Sebastian, are you really planning to stand here all night with that brooding look? You should learn to enjoy life a little more." Sebastian took a slow sip of his drink, his voice steady and calm. "I enjoy it in my own way." Lucas raised an eyebrow, his gaze drifting toward the far end of the room. A group of young women was chatting animatedly, but one stood out, Lila Kensington. Her auburn hair caught the light, and her striking blue eyes sparkled with a mix of confidence and defiance. She stood tall and proud, exuding an air of bold rebellion, as though daring the world to challenge her. "Lila Kensington," Lucas drawled, his tone laced with amusement. "She's the nightmare of high society, alluring but utterly wild. The tabloids can't get enough of her." Sebastian cast a brief glance at Lila, his expression unreadable. "And?" Lucas smirked, a glint of mischief in his eyes. "I bet you can't turn her into a perfect lady in 3 months." Sebastian set his glass down, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "And if I can?" $2 million, Lucas replied smoothly, his tone brimming with challenge. Sebastian considered the wager for a moment. This wasn't just a game to him. It was an opportunity to prove that nothing and no one was beyond his control. "Deal," he said decisively, his voice firm. Across the room, Lila felt a cold gaze settle on her. She turned slightly, catching Sebastian's piercing stare. Her lips curled into a sly, knowing smile, unaware that she had just become the focal point of a dangerous bet that would soon alter the course of her life. At the lavish gala in the Imperial Hotel, the dazzling chandeliers reflected over every corner of the Grand Hall. Among the crowd of the wealthy and powerful, the name Lila Kensington floated through whispered conversations, drawing curious glances. Sebastian, though typically indifferent to idle gossip, couldn't help but overhear snippets of conversation as he passed. "She's the Kensington heiress," one woman murmured to her friend. "An only daughter who does nothing but party and rebel. Her family's struggling to keep her in line." "Lila Kensington, right? I heard her father's trying to marry her off to some older businessman to strengthen the family's influence," the other replied. Sebastian's sharp gaze briefly flicked toward the woman they were discussing. Amid the sea of glittering gowns and champagne glasses, Lila stood out with her fiery auburn hair and bold, defiant smile. On the other side of the room, Lila had also noticed Sebastian's presence as he entered alongside Lucas Everett. His name quickly surfaced in the hushed exchanges of those around her. "That's Sebastian Harrington, isn't it?" one of her friends asked, her voice tinged with admiration. "The Harrington Group is booming under his leadership. They say he's ruthless and impossible to approach." Lila smirked, her tone dripping with mockery. "Cold, successful, and handsome. The perfect package, isn't he?" As if on cue, their eyes met briefly across the crowded room. Neither of them looked away, and in that fleeting moment, something shifted. Though no words were spoken, an unspoken awareness formed between them. Sebastian approached the shadowed corner of the bar where Lila Kensington sat, his sharp green eyes fixed on her as he closed the distance. The name Lila Kensington was no longer a mystery to him after the gala. Likewise, Lila knew exactly who he was, thanks to the murmurs she'd overheard about Sebastian Harrington that night. "Sebastian Harrington?" she said first, her voice laced with a sly edge. "Even you can't escape these dreadfully dull parties." Lila Kensington sat in a shadowed corner of the Imperial Hotel bar, a cocktail in hand and her gaze idly watching the stream of guests coming and going. She was accustomed to the curious glances, the whispered gossip, and the judgmental stares. The tabloids loved her, but none of them truly knew her. From across the room, Sebastian Harrington approached. The light from the chandelier above reflected off his impeccably tailored dark suit. His composed stride and piercing green eyes commanded attention, even in a crowd as elite as this one. Lila noticed him immediately. As he neared, she tilted her head slightly, a sly, mocking smile curling her lips. "Sebastian Harrington," she drawled, her voice smooth and laced with mischief. "Even you can't escape these dreadfully dull parties?" Sebastian pulled out a chair and sat across from her, his movements deliberate. "I have a proposition for you." Her eyebrow arched, intrigue flickering in her blue eyes. "A proposition? Let me guess. A business deal? An acquisition? Marriage," he said bluntly. The word hung in the air for a moment before Lila burst out laughing, the sound sharp and disbelieving. "Marriage? With you? You can't be serious." "I'm entirely serious," Sebastian replied, his tone unwavering. "We both need something. Your family is forcing you into a marriage you don't want, aren't they?" Her laughter faded, and the confidence on her face was briefly replaced by something more vulnerable. "How do you know that?" "I know more than you think," he said simply, "and I can help you get out of it. In return, I need you to play the role of my perfect wife for 3 months. After that, we'll divorce and you'll be free to do whatever you please." Lila studied him, trying to decipher the true motive behind his offer. "And what's in it for you?" Sebastian's lips curved into a faint, calculated smile. "Consider it a personal challenge." He didn't mention the wager with Lucas, but the determination in his eyes was unmistakable. Lila sat back, contemplating his words. Her instinct told her to dismiss him outright, yet there was something in his unwavering gaze, a mix of confidence and mystery, that made her hesitate. For the first time, she felt like someone wasn't underestimating her, and that intrigued her more than she cared to admit. Finally, she set her cocktail down, her eyes glinting with defiance. "All right, Sebastian, you have a deal." The wedding of Sebastian Harrington and Lila Kensington became a hot topic in London's elite circles. A powerful, stoic businessman marrying a rebellious socialite? It was a union that invited endless gossip. Lila walked down the aisle in a stunning gown, her bold confidence defying the scrutinizing gazes of the crowd. Sebastian stood beside her, his expression unreadable, as though he were fulfilling a duty rather than entering a marriage. But only the two of them knew the truth. This wasn't a love story. The Harrington estate, grand and elegant, became their shared home. But behind its opulent facade, the atmosphere was cold and distant. Lila carried on with her wild lifestyle. Late-night parties, extravagant shopping sprees, and high-speed drives kept her name on the front pages of tabloids. She made no effort to hide her disdain for the marriage, treating it as nothing more than a transaction disguised as love. Sebastian, however, remained unbothered. He didn't argue or scold her. He simply observed in silence. On the nights Lila returned home late, her laughter echoing through the halls, Sebastian would sit in the library, calmly folding his newspaper, his expression unchanging. His quiet indifference infuriated her even more. One night, Lila stumbled into the grand hall of the estate, drunk from yet another party. The golden lights cast a warm glow on her flushed cheeks. She spotted Sebastian standing near the library, his ever-calm demeanor as frustrating as always. "Sebastian," she drawled, her voice teasing and laced with mischief, "do you ever drop that cold facade, or are you just a statue brought to life?" Sebastian glanced at her, his piercing green eyes cold. "You should go to bed." But Lila wasn't ready to leave. She stepped closer, the faint scent of alcohol lingering in the air. "Don't you ever let go? Or are you afraid of losing control?" Smiling provocatively, she grabbed his tie, pulling him down toward her. Before he could stop her, she kissed him. A bold, daring kiss full of challenge. "Lila, stop," Sebastian murmured, his voice betraying the struggle within him. But when her lips brushed his again, something inside him snapped. He hadn't realized how much she'd gotten under his skin until this moment. Before he could think, his arms were around her, lifting her effortlessly as he carried her to the bedroom. In the quiet intimacy of the room, the walls between them seemed to dissolve. But as their closeness came to an end, Sebastian realized something he hadn't anticipated. Lila was a virgin. He stared at her, the surprise evident in his sharp green eyes. Lila lay on the bed, her auburn hair spilling across the pillows, her defiant blue eyes meeting his. "Surprise, eh?" she asked softly, her voice tinged with mockery. Sebastian didn't reply immediately. A wave of confusion and admiration washed over him. Lila wasn't the wild, reckless woman he had assumed her to be. She was a mystery, someone he had grossly misunderstood. For the first time, he began to see her for who she truly was. Over time, however, Sebastian began to notice sides of Lila he had not anticipated. One evening, as he passed the kitchen, he saw her handing a bundle of cash to the housekeeper. "This is for your son's tuition," she said softly. "Don't tell anyone I gave it to you." Her tone carried a warmth that starkly contrasted with her public persona of reckless indulgence. Sebastian started paying closer attention. He discovered that Lila quietly donated coats and supplies to orphanages and spent nights driving to impoverished neighborhoods, handing out food and blankets to the homeless. These were not the actions of a shallow socialite. Lila, on the other hand, began to see a different side of Sebastian. Beneath his cold exterior was a man carrying the weight of immense responsibility. She watched him spend endless nights buried in work, his sharp features etched with quiet determination. The man who once irritated her with his aloofness now piqued her curiosity. Gradually, the silent dinners in the Harrington mansion began to change. Brief conversations replaced the icy silence. The once frosty glances they exchanged softened into something more observant. Though neither could quite name it, an invisible shift had begun, and the walls they had carefully built around themselves were slowly starting to crumble. In the days following the intimate night between Sebastian and Lila, the atmosphere at the Harrington estate shifted subtly. They didn't speak about what had happened, but an unspoken closeness lingered between them. Lila's rebellious nature seemed to soften, while Sebastian began noticing the little things about her life. But just as things seemed to grow calmer, a series of devastating events unfolded. Isabella Monroe, the woman who once shattered Sebastian's heart, made a sudden and calculated return. She wasn't content with just sabotaging Sebastian's career. She wanted to hurt Lila, the woman she saw as taking the place that should have been hers. Through manipulation and false rumors, Isabella convinced key shareholders to withdraw support from Harrington Group. The company plunged into financial chaos. Major projects stalled, stocks plummeted, and whispers of bankruptcy grew louder. Sebastian, though always composed, was now working tirelessly, spending long days and sleepless nights in his office, fighting to save the company his family had built. One quiet afternoon, Lila sat at a small roadside cafe, seeking a moment of peace. As she sipped her cappuccino, she overheard a conversation at the next table. A group of Harrington employees was speaking in hushed tones, their voices filled with worry. "If we don't secure a new investor by next week, we're all going to lose our jobs," one of them said grimly. Lila froze. She had assumed Sebastian's recent coldness was because he didn't care about her, but now she realized he was carrying an enormous burden, fighting a silent battle to save the company. That evening, Lila returned to the estate and went straight to her study. She opened the safe and pulled out the documents for her mother's inheritance. To her, that money had always been a symbol of her mother's love and protection, but now she knew she had to use it to help Sebastian in his time of need. She called her lawyer, her tone firm. "Transfer a significant portion of my inheritance into Harrington Group's account. I want it done tonight." The lawyer hesitated. "Are you sure, Lila? This is a large sum." "I'm sure," she interrupted. "Do it. No delays." Later that night, As Lila drove home from a charity event, her mind was heavy with thoughts of Sebastian. She barely noticed the headlights of the truck speeding toward her until it was too late. The deafening screech of tires and the shattering of glass filled the air as her car slammed into the guardrail, flipping violently onto its side. Blood trickled down her face, and as her vision blurred, the last thing she thought of was Sebastian's fleeting smile. News of Lila's accident reached Sebastian in no time. He rushed to the hospital, his chest tightening as he saw her lying motionless on the hospital bed. Her face was pale, a deep gash on her forehead a stark reminder of the crash. Sebastian sank into the chair beside her, his hand gently clasping her cold fingers. For the first time in years, he felt powerless, a feeling he had always prided himself on avoiding. "Lila, why did you have to go through this?" he whispered, his voice breaking with emotion. George, Sebastian's trusted assistant, entered the room, holding a thick file. "Mr. Harrington, I think you should see this." Sebastian opened the file, his sharp eyes immediately catching a familiar name, Lila Kensington. He realized that while he had been fighting to save the company, Lila had quietly transferred a massive sum of money from her inheritance to fund Harrington Group. As he sat there holding the documents, memories flooded back. Her quiet stares, the disappointment in her eyes, the times she had tried to speak to him only to be dismissed. She had done it all without expecting anything in return. Sebastian leaned closer to Lila, his expression softening as he gazed at her pale face. "You've been there for me all along, haven't you?" he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. His chest tightened as he realized how blind he'd been, how he'd let his pride and past wounds cloud his judgment. "I didn't deserve you, but I'll spend the rest of my life proving that I can. I was wrong. I don't deserve it, but please, come back to me." Lila's fingers twitched faintly and her eyelids fluttered open. Her tired but warm gaze met his, and a weak smile crossed her lips. "You know now, don't you?" she asked softly, her voice fragile but carrying a hint of teasing. Sebastian nodded, his grip on her hand tightening. "I know, and I'm sorry. I wasn't worth it, but I'll change. From now on, I'll never let you face anything alone again." A few months after Lila's recovery, the Harrington estate no longer felt as cold as it once had. Harrington Group had stabilized after the crisis, but more importantly, Sebastian and Lila's relationship had transformed into something neither of them could have foreseen. One quiet evening, Sebastian led Lila out to the small garden behind the estate. The soft glow of golden lights illuminated the blooming roses, creating a romantic scene under the starry sky. Lila stopped in the middle of the garden, her striking blue eyes sparkling with curiosity. "Sebastian, what are we doing out here?" Sebastian didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pulled a small velvet box from his pocket and knelt on one knee. The cold sharpness in his green eyes had been replaced with warmth and vulnerability. "Lila," he began, his deep voice steady but filled with emotion. "The first time I proposed to you, it was because of a foolish wager. But tonight, I want to do this the right way." Lila froze, her eyes locked on his. "You've changed my life in ways I never imagined," he continued, his voice soft yet firm. "You've taught me that love isn't a game or a power struggle. I want to start over with real love." He opened the box, revealing a diamond ring that sparkled under the moonlight. "Lila Kensington, will you forgive me and give me a chance to prove how much I love you?" Tears welled in Lila's eyes, glistening like diamonds under the moonlight. She let out a shaky laugh, overwhelmed by the sincerity in his voice. "I will, Sebastian," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Let's start over, this time, with real love." Sebastian stood and slid the ring onto her finger before pulling her into his arms. Beneath the starlit sky, they shared a tender kiss, sealing their promise to leave the past behind and embrace a future built on genuine love.